Romance is officially dead, and the American legal system is holding the murder weapon. People swear they marry for love, but court records tell a deeply embarrassing, entirely different story. We found the most psychotic, financially ruined, and outright pathetic reasons citizens actually signed a marriage license. Prepare to lose total faith in human decision-making. 1. There is zero romance inside a speeding ambulance, yet one woman managed to find it while violently coughing up a chewed pretzel. After nearly choking to death right on her kitchen floor, she felt a profound, spontaneous urge to live dangerously. Her brilliant idea of seizing the day was legally binding herself to the exact paramedic who performed the Heimlich maneuver on her. It was a pulse-pounding fairy tale fueled entirely by a lack of oxygen. The adrenaline crash happened the exact second the massive hospital bills arrived in the mail. Turns out, life-saving chest compressions do not magically translate into financial compatibility or a healthy lifelong commitment. 2. Some people clip coupons, and others commit lifelong legal fraud just to dodge professional consulting fees. A hardcore weekend warrior was dead set on gutting and flipping a massive, crumbling historic house entirely by himself. To cut corners, he aggressively pursued and married a licensed architect, genuinely believing he had just scored a free, live-in contractor. His genius financial master plan had a fatal structural flaw. The marriage violently collapsed the exact second he ignored his new wife's frantic warnings and gleefully smashed a sledgehammer right through a primary load-bearing wall. He destroyed the living room ceiling and his marriage in one spectacular swing. 3. Hiding your personal life from conservative parents can be exhausting, but this guy treated it like an incredibly stressful off-Broadway production. Terrified of coming out to his family, he married his closest female friend just to survive the holidays without getting interrogated. It was a flawless vintage sitcom strategy, complete with fake anniversaries and very stiff hugs at Thanksgiving. Astonishingly, they kept up this exhausting charade for 2 solid years. The grand finale wasn't even a dramatic confession. His actual, hidden boyfriend, named Jeff, casually walked into the kitchen during family dinner and asked, "Hey babe, where's the gravy?" Curtain drops, the gig is absolutely up, and mom finally stopped asking about grandchildren. 4. Walter literally proposed to a turkey club sandwich. After eating a lunch crafted by a woman named Melissa, he confidently declared the bacon-to-mayo ratio to be structurally perfect. This man was so easily manipulated by basic deli meat that he lost his mind and asked her to marry him that exact same evening. He operated under the deeply flawed logic that masterful kitchen skills automatically equated to an obedient, flawless wife. This greasy, unhinged fairy tale derailed the very first time he demanded she whip up a sequel sandwich while he watched television. She looked him dead in the eyes and told him to make it himself. The holy matrimony survived for exactly 2.5 meals. 5. High stakes. Dog shows breed a very specific, terrifying type of human desperation. A guy owned a prized, heavily groomed poodle but could not enter the most exclusive kennel club competition because of a ridiculously strict members and spouses only policy. Did he just find a normal hobby? Absolutely not. He legally married his dog walker on a random Tuesday just to get past the velvet rope. The absolute craziest part is that they actually won Best in Show. However, the romance of convenience didn't even survive the celebratory dinner. They had the marriage annulled before the giant shiny trophy even had a chance to collect its first layer of living room dust. 6. How far would you honestly go to get your hands on a good bowl of soup? One guy tasted a batch of chili at a neighborhood potluck and was so deeply moved by the flavor that he married the woman who brought it, purely to inherit her grandmother's highly guarded secret recipe. He infiltrated the bloodline like a culinary corporate spy. The betrayal he felt on his first married Sunday was monumental. He snuck into the kitchen to finally witness the magic, only to discover his new wife casually opening a giant, dented can of generic store-brand chili and aggressively dumping extra cumin into the pot. He committed his entire life to a $2 grocery aisle special. 7. A genius in modern problem-solving married her husband for one highly specific, deeply petty reason. The man held a permanent, legally binding lifetime ban from her mother's absolute favorite chain restaurant after a drunken altercation years prior. By marrying him, she secured a flawless, ironclad excuse to never attend another agonizing family dinner at that specific establishment ever again. She traded her legal independence for a permanent get-out-of-dinner-free card. The brilliant tactical maneuver backfired spectacularly when her mother simply forgave the guy, called the restaurant manager to lift the ban, and forced them all to eat mediocre pasta together every single Sunday. 8. Networking is crucial in the real estate game, but these two absolute sharks took it to a psychopathic new level. Two fiercely competitive rival agents got legally hitched for one highly specific reason. They wanted unfettered access to each other's exclusive, high-net-worth client contact lists. There was zero genuine affection here whatsoever. It was basically a cold-blooded corporate merger that just happened to involve an expensive wedding cake. The beautiful partnership went straight into foreclosure when one of them secretly sold a multi-million-dollar mansion to a client right out from under the other's nose, pocketing a massive solo commission. Trust is definitely not included in the closing costs. 9. Orchestrating a massive dance routine in the middle of a packed shopping mall should be a federal crime. A guy attempted a flash mob proposal, and his actual girlfriend was so profoundly humiliated that she literally sprinted away through the food court. But a random woman standing nearby got totally swept up in the cheesy music and yelled out that she would marry him. The guy, utterly paralyzed by the staring crowd and public panic, just nodded his head and went along with it. They actually signed the legal paperwork. The entire accidental union survived exactly long enough for the incredibly awkward cell phone video to hit 1 million views before they rushed to a lawyer to undo the madness. 10. Everyone knows that one insufferable college philosophy major who simply refuses to be a normal member of society. This particular genius decided to marry a random classmate strictly to prove his incredibly pretentious theory that marriage is nothing but a hollow social construct devoid of inherent meaning. He thought he was striking a massive blow against traditional institutions and societal norms. Well, his new bride ended up teaching him a much more valuable real-world lesson. 6 months into this grand intellectual experiment, she filed for divorce and legally took half of everything he owned. He quickly learned that a court-ordered alimony payment is a very tangible, extremely expensive reality. 11. Minimalism met maximum disaster when a guy who proudly owned exactly 100 physical items legally bound himself to a certified, unstoppable hoarder. He honestly believed his bare-bones lifestyle would magically cure her terrifying compulsion to keep decades-old newspapers. They treated their marriage like a grand psychological experiment. The universe violently rejected this arrangement on the very first weekend. He attempted to quietly throw away a highly hazardous cardboard box full of rusty antique sewing thimbles while she was asleep. She woke up, caught him in the act, and initiated World War III right in the middle of a heavily cluttered hallway. They filed the papers almost immediately. 12. Utter financial desperation makes otherwise smart people perform incredibly stupid legal gymnastics. Two broke college graduates stumbled upon a highly questionable internet rumor. They genuinely believed that if they got married and then immediately divorced in a specific state, obscure local laws would magically wipe out their massive private student loans. It was the ultimate millennial bank heist. They paid for the license, awkwardly said their vows, and immediately filed the divorce papers. The magnificent punchline here is that the state legislature officially closed that loophole exactly 1 week before a judge could finalize their split. Their brilliant master plan completely backfired, leaving them legally bound to each other and still absolutely drowning in insurmountable debt. 13. Treating your entire personal existence like a quarterly business review is absolutely terrifying behavior. A hyper-organized couple maintained a shared digital spreadsheet of exactly 100 life goals to complete before they died. Getting married was literally just line item number 99. They marched down the aisle with the robotic efficiency of a factory assembly line, completely devoid of any real emotion, just to check a box somewhere between running a half marathon and taking a local pottery class. Once they updated their relationship status, their partnership was amicably dissolved because they had successfully achieved their final spreadsheet objective, labeled as mutually optimized separate life paths. They shook hands like mid-level managers and walked away. 14. Outsourcing your free will is certainly one way to avoid stress. A guy who suffered from crippling daily indecision married a woman who was pathologically assertive and controlling. He honestly believed he had hacked the entire system of life. He figured he would never have to sweat over picking a restaurant, choosing a movie, or buying a car ever again. He just handed the steering wheel of his existence over to his wife. To be fair, the bizarre arrangement worked flawlessly for a solid year. That is, until a sunny Tuesday morning when she definitively decided, entirely on his behalf, that he would be significantly happier if they got a swift divorce. He didn't even get a vote in the matter. 15. Intoxication and a crowded dive bar can easily scramble your judgment. Two absolute strangers accidentally shared the stage for a late-night karaoke duet of Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers. The vocal harmony was so surprisingly decent that their drunk brains convinced them they were undeniable, star-crossed soulmates. They skipped the entire dating process and eloped at a chapel the very next morning while still nursing massive, throbbing hangovers. Unsurprisingly, their real-world duet was painfully out of tune. The marriage crashed and burned in a spectacular hotel lobby screaming match over who was aggressively hogging the microphone during their breakfast buffet encore performance. Some hits really should just stay in the 1980s. 16. Relying on the stars for financial planning is an incredibly bold strategy. A woman paid a premium rate to an underground astrologer who confidently guaranteed that a highly unappealing, lazy local man was cosmically destined to become a multimillionaire and drop dead by age 40. Acting entirely on this psychic financial advice, she aggressively pursued him, married him, and waited to collect her massive cosmic inheritance. The universe played a cruel joke on her greedy intentions. Not only did the guy remain aggressively unemployed and broke, but he ended up outliving the psychic's prediction by 3 entirely healthy, incredibly annoying decades. She aged horribly, waiting for a payday that never arrived. 17. Technology ruins lives, but sheer cowardice sealed the deal for this guy. He tried to send a text to a girl he was casually seeing that simply said they should get burgers. His phone's completely unhinged autocorrect changed the message to say they should get married. Instead of immediately replying with a frantic apology and a laughing emoji, he completely froze in terror. When she texted back a massive, excited yes, he was just too painfully awkward to admit the technological blunder. He literally walked down the aisle to avoid having an uncomfortable conversation. This nightmare of a typo survived for nearly a year until their first major fight, where he finally snapped and screamed the absolute truth. 18. Boredom and a desperate craving for cheap vending machine food drove one woman to commit minor federal paperwork fraud. She started writing to an inmate doing hard time, not out of charity, but because she heard a rumor that the prison's conjugal visit trailer featured an absolutely elite, entirely unregulated snack bar. She legally married a convicted felon strictly to gain weekend access to discontinued potato chips and cheap microwave burgers. This culinary prison heist came to a grinding halt when the warden updated the vending machines to healthy, low-sodium options. Deprived of her junk food, she mailed him divorce papers directly to his cell block. 19. Legally binding yourself to a complete stranger out of pure, unadulterated spite is certainly a choice. A guy desperately wanted to prove to his recent ex-girlfriend that he was absolutely capable of serious, long-term commitment. In a masterclass of theatrical desperation, he went out and married the literal first woman who agreed to sign the paperwork. He immediately mailed the professional wedding photos directly to his ex's apartment, expecting some dramatic, jealous, emotional breakdown. Her entire response was texting him one single word: yikes. His grand, romantic gesture of stability instantly collapsed into a pile of regret, and the poor rebound wife filed for divorce exactly 3 weeks later. 20. Sibling rivalry can drive a perfectly sane person to do incredibly stupid things. Right after his younger sister threw a massive, obscenely expensive storybook wedding, this guy felt completely overshadowed and ignored. He could not stomach losing the family spotlight for even a second. In a fit of petty, jealous rage, he dragged a woman he had been casually dating for exactly 6 weeks to a courthouse and eloped, purely to steal the attention back. It was a flawless, incredibly toxic victory. The bizarre union lasted exactly until Thanksgiving dinner, when his sister stood up at the table and announced she was having twins. Instantly, his stunt became yesterday's news. 21. Signing a modern legal document with a feather quill should be an immediate red flag for any government official. Two hardcore Civil War reenactors decided to take their weekend hobby to an uncomfortable permanent level. After courting entirely in character as a stoic Union soldier and a fainting Southern belle, they threw a painfully accurate 19th century wedding ceremony. The massive problem with living in the past is that you simply cannot churn butter forever. Their grand historical fantasy violently collided with reality the second they returned to their apartment. The union disintegrated over a highly aggressive screaming match because the husband absolutely refused to share his Netflix password. 22. Never rely on local wildlife to dictate your major life choices. Two amateur birdwatchers were hiking deep in the woods when they spotted what they believed was an incredibly rare ivory-billed woodpecker, a bird widely considered to be entirely extinct. They took this as a miraculous, divine endorsement from the heavens and rushed to the altar exactly a week later. But their magical, avian blessed romance crashed to the ground almost immediately. During their first official birding trip as a married couple, they got into a vicious, relationship-ending shouting match over identifying the call of a basic, everyday sparrow. Not even a mythical forest creature can fix fundamental personality clashes. 23. Turning your personal misery into monetized content is the absolute peak of modern internet culture. Two desperate influencers launched a wildly unethical video series titled, "Can Two Strangers Fall in Love and Stay Married for 30 Days?" They essentially capitalized on their own miserable blind date. Every single awkward dinner, fake fight, and forced cuddle session was highly edited and uploaded for massive ad revenue. The grand social experiment ended exactly on day 30 with a highly promoted livestream where both parties emphatically agreed that they absolutely hated each other. The channel gained 2 million shiny new subscribers, and the happy couple gained a fast-track legal annulment from a very annoyed judge. 24. Watching someone successfully navigate Swedish flat-pack furniture without having a nervous breakdown is mesmerizing, but it is hardly a reason to propose. A guy watched his girlfriend build an entire bookcase in under an hour with absolutely zero leftover screws. He was so completely blown away by this display of spatial awareness and supreme patience that he proposed right there on the living room rug. He thought he had secured a mechanical genius for life. This union, built entirely on cheap particle board and false hope, met its brutal end a month later. They attempted to build a massive wardrobe together, which naturally resulted in hysterical sobbing, a thrown Allen wrench, and a permanent separation. 25. Blurring the line between reality and an online server rarely ends well. Kevin and Tina spent 5 years dominating a massive online role-playing game. Because their heavily armored digital avatars had a lavish virtual wedding, they figured they might as well do it in real life, despite living 2,000 miles apart. They met up and foolishly signed the actual papers. Shockingly, living with a real human being who leaves dirty dishes in the sink is vastly different than slaying digital dragons with a level 90 paladin. The crushing reality of their extremely boring personalities set in almost instantly. Their real-world marriage was permanently deleted faster than a corrupted save file. 26. Dealing with housing laws in major cities will absolutely drive property owners to insanity. A landlord had a stubborn tenant occupying a highly coveted rent-controlled apartment, and she absolutely refused to leave. Instead of offering her cash to move, this man hatched a genuinely psychotic, convoluted scheme. He legally married her, assuming that making her his wife and then swiftly divorcing her would somehow legally nullify the original ironclad lease agreement. He honestly thought he was a legal mastermind. The judge presiding over their divorce court had a wonderfully different interpretation of tenant law. Not only did she get to keep the cheap apartment, but the judge awarded her a hefty alimony check. 27. Bonding over absolute terror in the dark is a very weird way to find true love. Two amateur ghost hunters fell madly for each other while running around an abandoned asylum with flickering flashlights and cheap audio recorders. They decided to tie the knot and celebrate by pooling their money to buy a genuinely notorious, allegedly haunted historical home. The tough guy paranormal partnership instantly dematerialized on the very first night. Once the floorboards actually started creaking and doors slammed on their own, one of them broke down crying and confessed they were absolutely terrified of actual ghosts. They sold the creepy house and the marriage within the exact same month. 28. Taking major life advice from a strip mall psychic is a guaranteed recipe for disaster. A woman paid $50 to a fortune teller who confidently swore her eternal soulmate would be the very next man she saw wearing a red shirt. Destiny is a hilarious thing because the universe immediately delivered a sweaty Target clerk on his 15-minute smoke break outside the sliding glass doors. Completely ignoring common sense, she sprinted up, introduced herself, and aggressively proposed just a week later. The cosmic romance violently flatlined the moment his massive credit card bills showed up in the mailbox. The entire union lasted exactly 19 days, which is notably shorter than a standard retail return window. 29. Getting out of a massive traffic fine is an American pastime, but this guy took it way too far. Pulled over for aggressively speeding on the highway, he went into a sheer blind panic and lied to the state trooper. He claimed he and his girlfriend were rushing to the courthouse to get married that exact minute. The cop, feeling surprisingly sentimental, let them off with a warning and a congratulatory salute. Terrified the cop would somehow check public records, they drove straight to the clerk's office and actually went through with it. They bound themselves in holy matrimony just to dodge a $200 citation and barely survived one excruciatingly awkward weekend together. 30. Ruthless ambition turns a lot of perfectly normal people into corporate monsters. A highly driven junior executive was utterly exhausted from climbing the company ladder the slow, traditional way. So he surgically targeted the company's CEO's painfully awkward, incredibly nerdy child. It was a masterclass in fake affection. He married into the family and his diabolical plan worked flawlessly. Within 6 short months, he was handed the shiny title of vice president and given a massive corner office with a city view. The very next day, he filed for a brutally efficient, emotionless divorce. He secured his massive salary bump and left a very confused, heartbroken nerd completely in the dust. 31. Hyperfixating on a physical trait is a terrible foundation for a legal contract. A guy was absolutely obsessed with a woman's naturally fiery red hair. He practically wrote bad poetry about it, comparing her locks to autumn leaves and blazing sunsets. Completely smitten by a simple color palette, he proposed after only a month of dating. He thought he had captured a mystical forest nymph. This incredibly deep spiritual connection abruptly ended on a random Tuesday when she came home from the salon having dyed her hair a dark brunette. The guy completely lost his mind, accused her of malicious false advertising, and filed for a divorce the following morning. 32. Those late-night safety net packs always sound like a hilarious joke until the clock actually runs out. Two best friends swore that if they were both still painfully single at age 40, they would just marry each other to avoid dying alone in a house full of cats. The dreaded deadline arrived, and neither had any prospects. Stubbornly honoring the deal, they made a wildly depressing clinical trip to the local courthouse. It was basically a roommate agreement with extra government paperwork. This fiercely pragmatic arrangement shattered 18 months later when one of them actually met someone and fell legitimately in love, forcing the most awkward breakup conversation in human history. 33. Local morning radio shows are an absolute menace to society. Two sworn enemies, who had passionately despised each other since high school, heard a morning broadcast offering a brand new, fully loaded pickup truck to any two strangers willing to get married live on the air. Driven purely by greed and vehicular lust, they rushed down to the studio and signed the papers while the DJ cheered. They thought they could just sell the truck, split the cash, and annul the nightmare. Sadly, the fine print of the radio contract mandated they stay legally wed and live together for an entire year to keep the prize. The truck was repossessed after they nearly killed each other on month 2. 34. You absolutely cannot code your way into a healthy relationship, but that will never stop a tech bro from trying. A Silicon Valley software developer decided a traditional diamond ring proposal was wildly inefficient. Instead, he presented his equally robotic girlfriend with a legally binding love contract, fully loaded with measurable performance metrics, key performance indicators, and mandatory quarterly relationship reviews. She actually signed the thing. They attempted to run a marriage exactly like a tech startup. This highly optimized, data-driven partnership was permanently terminated exactly 8 months later because one party officially failed to meet their mandated emotional support quota for 2 consecutive financial quarters. They literally fired each other. 35. Fighting for tips on a crowded sidewalk is tough, but attempting to create a street performance monopoly is a terrible idea. 2 rival performers, a guy painted silver acting as a human statue and a woman doing classic mime routines, decided to join forces. They figured getting married and merging their gimmicks would create an unstoppable duo act and double their daily cash earnings. Sadly, the business merger was an absolute creative nightmare. He constantly demanded more rigid stillness, while she insisted on incorporating far more invisible boxes into the daily routine. This massive clash of theatrical egos led to a fiercely angry, yet completely silent, public breakup right in the middle of a tourist promenade. 36. Getting paid to sleep on the concrete is a weird gig, but confusing it for romance is even weirder. 2 professional line sitters, the folks who camp out for the newest cell phones or limited edition sneakers, met while stuck on a freezing sidewalk. After surviving 72 grueling hours in folding chairs eating stale granola bars, they mistakenly thought they had a bulletproof bond. They literally flagged down an officiant and got married right there in the sneaker line. What a massive miscalculation. Their very first blowout argument as a legally wedded couple happened just 3 days later, because neither of them wanted to wait in the agonizingly slow line at the local DMV. 37. Nothing brings a lovely couple together quite like the absolute certainty of an impending global collapse. 2 hardcore doomsday preppers met on a paranoid internet forum and instantly bonded over their shared belief that a zombie outbreak was just weeks away. They completely skipped the honeymoon phase and got legally married purely to consolidate their underground bunkers, tactical gear, and massive water supplies. It was a deeply romantic survival pact. However, the apocalypse partnership self-destructed before the world even ended. They got into a nuclear-level screaming match over the nutritional superiority of canned chili versus military-grade rations. If you cannot agree on the end-of-the-world menu, it is never going to work. 38. Mixing competitive trivia with an obscene amount of cheap draft beer is a highly dangerous cocktail. A guy and his trivia partner were deadlocked in a massive tiebreaker at a rowdy local pub. The final chaotic question thrown out by the host was asking who in the room was brave enough to go get married right that second. Fueled by a toxic need to win at all costs, they sprinted to the 24-hour wedding chapel next door. They signed the papers, ran back, and successfully claimed the grand prize of a $50 bar tab. The ultimate tragedy is that the marriage was frantically annulled before they even sobered up the next afternoon. 39. Never bring a breadstick to a proposal unless you actively want to ruin your own life. During a heavily scenic Italian vacation, a woman leaned over a beautiful hotel balcony and sarcastically muttered that her boyfriend should just marry her right then and there. She was being entirely cynical. He completely missed the tone, panicked under the pressure, dropped to one knee, and proposed using a piece of stale table bread. She was so profoundly mortified by the staring waiters that she couldn't bring herself to humiliate him with a rejection. They went through the motions out of sheer, agonizing embarrassment and agreed to a divorce before their flight even touched down back in Ohio. 40. Navigating the modern healthcare system is a nightmare, especially when it involves a sick pet. A woman owned a highly decorated prize-winning bulldog that suddenly required a massively expensive, complex surgery. Her personal insurance was utterly useless. However, her male best friend worked for a massive tech corporation that offered an insanely elite +1 pet policy for legally recognized spouses. They grabbed a marriage license, filed the human resources paperwork, and successfully got the dog a top-tier operation entirely on the company dime. Once the golden retriever was fully healed and the final veterinary invoice was zeroed out, they dissolved the union with a quick signature to avoid tax fraud. 41. Network television will stoop to any level for ratings, and sometimes the legal system gets dragged right into the mess. The producers of an extreme survival show hired two out-of-work actors to pretend to be a deeply in love married couple. The goal was to outlast real couples in brutal challenges to win a cool $1 million. The crazy part is that these two fakers were so utterly ruthless that they destroyed the actual married people and won the entire competition. They legally tied the knot just to make the background checks look legitimate for the network. The second the giant novelty check cleared the bank, they split the cash and filed for an annulment. 42. Chasing absolutely meaningless internet clout makes people do historically stupid things. A couple of fame-hungry idiots hatched a brilliant plan to permanently etch their names into history by achieving the official world record for the absolute shortest marriage ever recorded. They proudly marched into the courthouse, signed the legal documents, and literally filed for an annulment exactly 58 minutes later. They were so incredibly proud of their pathetic stunt. Here is the best part. The record book completely rejected their submission, citing it as a mockery of the institution. So they didn't get their names in print, but they did earn a massive pile of confusing legal bills. 43. Urban parking is an absolute nightmare, but is it really worth signing away half your assets? A guy living in a brutally crowded metropolitan downtown met a woman who happened to inherit a standalone, highly coveted private driveway right next to his office. He didn't care about her personality. He was strictly in love with her asphalt. He married her purely to stop paying $50 a day in parking garage fees. This pavement-based romance cracked wide open when the city suddenly rezoned the neighborhood, forcefully bought out the driveway through eminent domain, and turned it into a public bus stop. He lost his parking spot and his freedom in one swift motion. 44. Constantly needing to up the ante is a dangerous mindset, especially when planning a wedding. Two professional Hollywood stunt performers decided a normal ceremony was just too boring. So they exchanged their vows while entirely covered in highly flammable gel, literally set themselves ablaze, and jumped off a high platform into a swimming pool. They smugly told reporters that if they could survive being on fire together, their marriage was absolutely bulletproof. Well, basic mathematics proved them wrong 6 months later. It turns out that a completely unscripted, highly aggressive screaming match over maxed-out credit card debt is vastly more destructive than a controlled Hollywood burn stunt. You cannot outrun a terrible credit score. 45. Having your parents constantly breathe down your neck is a suffocating way to live. Two kids grew up with mothers who were inseparable best friends. For 20 solid years, these parents relentlessly pushed the narrative that their children were destined to marry each other. It was an endless campaign of nagging. Finally, in their late 20s, the kids were so utterly exhausted by the relentless hinting that they just caved and went through with a massive parent-funded wedding, strictly to get everyone to shut up. This forced marriage of sheer convenience lasted exactly until their first solo vacation, where they realized they fundamentally despised the sound of each other's breathing. 46. Screaming over the sound of flying debris is an incredibly weird way to start a life together. A deranged storm chaser dragged his meteorologist girlfriend out into the literal eye of a massive hurricane. Surrounded by destruction and deafening wind, he screamed out a proposal, genuinely believing this was the peak of dramatic romance. Running on pure, terrified adrenaline, she actually shouted yes. Their relationship was literally forged in a violent vortex of extreme weather. But once hurricane season ended, so did the absolute magic. They spent their very first sunny, calm weekend sitting in their quiet living room and realized they had absolutely zero overlapping interests without the immediate threat of being crushed by a flying car. 47. At a certain point, society needs to have a serious conversation about adult theme park fanatics. These two grown humans based their entire courtship around a nauseating string of matching embroidered mouse ears and aggressively themed vacation dates. They blew their entire life savings to legally tie the knot right in front of a giant plastic castle. But the corporate magic completely vanished during their first real-world family crisis. A massive trip with the in-laws resulted in epic meltdowns, ungodly crowds, and the soul-crushing realization that owning a massive collection of animated plastic cups does not actually constitute a human personality. The happiest place on earth quickly became a miserable divorce battleground. 48. How much is decent household plumbing actually worth to you? One desperate guy had been living with a violently leaking kitchen faucet for 6 agonizing months. After his slumlord aggressively ignored dozens of frantic maintenance requests, the tenant resorted to the absolute nuclear option of property management. He aggressively courted, dated, and eventually married the landlord's daughter. It was an act of pure, waterlogged desperation. The insane tactic actually worked flawlessly, as the landlord sent a plumber to fix the sink the exact morning after the wedding reception. But having dry cabinets simply wasn't worth the lifelong commitment to a terrible family, and the resentment started dripping almost immediately. 49. Diving into New Age mysticism is a fantastic way to completely ruin a perfectly normal Tuesday. After a highly questionable session with a strip mall hypnotist, 2 complete strangers became fiercely convinced they were the reincarnated souls of a tragically separated couple from ancient Rome. They aggressively fast-tracked a wedding, just to finally give their epic, centuries-old historical romance the happy ending it deserved. It was wildly dramatic. However, the timeline got completely destroyed a year later. The husband went back to a different hypnotist, only to discover a startling new truth. He wasn't her Roman lover, he was actually her sworn blood rival from ancient Egypt, so they immediately filed the divorce paperwork. 50. Destroying your actual life for engagement metrics is the saddest modern tragedy. A massive lifestyle influencer was obsessed with pushing a rustic, farm-to-table aesthetic on her daily feed. To solidify her online brand, she went out and purposely married a rugged, genuinely hardworking dairy farmer, treating the poor guy like a human prop. She got her perfect, sun-drenched barn photo shoots and endless posts bragging about real country living. Her engagement metrics absolutely skyrocketed. But this highly curated aesthetic partnership violently soured the very first time winter hit, and she was expected to roll out of bed at 4 in the morning to actually shovel freezing manure. You cannot put a filter on farm labor. If you could erase your entire marriage history for $1,000, how fast would you hand over the cash? Be brutally honest in the comments. I know half of you are sitting next to someone you only married for the health insurance. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me exactly how long your biggest legal mistake lasted. Do not lie to me.